Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 114 of our Industry Insights show. Jason and I are back together. It's a little chilly where I am. Jason's in Texas. I am in Colorado, where we set some records yesterday for being a little chilly, and I've got rest of world friends coming in, already populated. We've got our producer in Georgia, United States. Our communications specialist is well over in Europe. Yep, 3 U.S. states right there. Love to have you mention where you're tuning in from. We've got Portugal, Algeria, Ukraine,
Nice.
many countries coming in, and some, Jason, which are a little bit new, and either haven't seen them in a while or haven't ever seen them before. So we'll hit this map from time to time. Be sure to put out anything in the comments. If you have something you want to say or questions you want to ask while we're streaming, feel free to do that. And of course, feel free to give a shout out where you may be tuning in from. I am unfortunately down very low of hot coffee on a cold day in my space station Death Wish coffee mug. So we're going to forge ahead, Jason. What are we going to talk about this week? Nice. Well done. Mugs are good.
Not going to tell you what's in my mug, but I'm doing better by the minute. That's all I'm going to say. All right. So as far as what we're going to talk about, so this is week 3 in our series from the Data Protection Trends Report for 2023. Just to remind the kids at home, especially for those first-time watchers, so the Data Protection Trends Report, we surveyed 4,200, yes, a little over 4,000 independent IT leaders on a variety of topics. Now, this was a blind survey, meaning that Veeam contracts with an outside agency. They go out and ask several of the questions along the way. We just want to get the results, right? So this is week 3. And for the kids at home who haven't watched in a while, let's rehash a little bit of what was covered in the first 2 weeks, because I think that kind of sets the stage for us. So couple data points that we covered in the last 2 weeks that I think are relevant. So the first one is for 2023, organizations said that about half, 47% of their production workloads are cloud hosted. Right. So that's going to include a lot of IaaS. That's going to include a lot of PaaS. So infrastructure running on Amazon and Azure and Google, right? Managed MSPs that offer production IaaS. And then, Dave, I think it's fair to say where it can also lump in some SaaS, so some 365, some Salesforce, those kind of things too. But 47%, just over half of your production workloads are not running within your data center. Right. So I think that's a really interesting gamut. And you can see here, by the way, about a fourth of them are VMs, about a fourth of them are physical servers. So that's the set of the landscape. And Dave, I don't think it's unrelated that the second stat that we're going to share is that 4 out of 5 organizations, 79%, think there is a gap between how much data they can afford to lose and for how long or how frequently or how well organizations are protecting their production data. And I think those are correlated because for a lot of organizations, they're not protecting the cloud as well or as often as they used to protect those workloads when they were on-prem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, it's interesting. I should reiterate, these 4,200 responses aren't Veeam customers. In fact, only a small fraction of the customer base in there are Veeam customers. It's industry representative. What's interesting to me, though, Jason, is we're surveying the actual practitioners, the actual administrators involved, the actual managers of those functions that are involved with providing availability. And they are self-reporting that, to your point, roughly 4 out of 5 are saying, we think we're going to lose more data than the organization can tolerate. And by the way, from a speed or time perspective, we think of the data we can get back, it's not going to be fast enough to meet what the organization is expecting. Again, these are the practitioners, the people that are involved with designing, implementing, and carrying out those activities are saying. So nobody knows better than they do. So if roughly almost half the workloads today and then next year, 2024, just barely over half the workloads expected to go to the cloud. So to your point, Jason, workloads have shifted, but also in the last couple of years, not to keep belaboring the point, but pandemic accelerated an awful lot of change, even within the data center itself. So for the teams just trying to keep up from an availability perspective, A lot of stuff going to the cloud, some lift and shift, some born in the cloud. A lot of things that remained on-prem changing, a lot of gear and upgrades that they hoped to make maybe didn't happen either due to finances or supply chain. So I don't want to paint a negative picture that it's never been a more difficult time to be in the availability business, but certainly demand's constraints are taking a toll from what we see here.
Man, you said a lot of good stuff in that, my friend. I think the two things that really stuck out to me on that was the idea that certainly because of the pandemic, we had that hyper acceleration of modernization towards the cloud, right? And many times they were modernizing production faster than protection. We'll talk a little bit more about that along the way. But I think the other thing that a lot of folks figured out, and of course you're in a cold snap right now up there in Colorado, Texas is actually in one as well. We have snow days right now. The pandemic and then all the weather and stuff has taught us we are so dependent on our data. For all of us who are now working from home, especially unexpected, we are so hypersensitive to what do you mean I can't get to those IT systems? If I can't get to those, I can't do my job, right? So there's a third stat that kind of rounds this out, and I bet folks at home can imagine that's coming because there's a blank space on this slide, and we should fill that in. So if we know that half the workloads are in the cloud, and we know there's a dissat overall in protection, it should not come as a surprise that when organizations that said they were looking for a new backup solution, or if they were looking for a new backup solution, what would be the primary criteria of what they're looking for? Number one criteria is the ability to protect clouds, right? Because they're not getting the protection they want, and they know all their new workloads are coming up to a cloud. Dave, I'm not sure these are actually 3 data points. This might just be one big headline.
Yeah, everything relates to everything. So nothing's in isolation, in other words, especially from an availability perspective, because critical workloads live and exist everywhere, moving, but still exist in multiple locations, multiple different deployment models. So the constraints from the past, as we saw, many of them remain. Certainly the causes of outages remain very, very consistent.
Yep.
Yes, cyber is rising, but everything that we've always had to worry about in the data center for literally decades still remains a concern, something that we do have to worry about. So this cloud momentum, not surprising. I think what could be surprising for some is just how much of a reality it is today from a production need to protect point of view.
Well, and that's going to be a pretty good segue to our next point. So I don't know if we want to do the map before or after, but I do think there's something interesting that we should kind of unpack with maybe as folks weigh in on that map scenario. One of the questions that was new that was asked this year was, do you expect your organization's budget for data protection, that includes both backup and also perhaps the more strategic aspects of BCDR, business continuity, disaster recovery, how do you expect that to change for the 2023 year? And Dave, I'm going to net this out as, I've said on Twitter for about a decade or so, when you modernize production, you got to modernize protection. We've seen the modernization of production. We're going to talk more about that. But turns out, on average, globally, out of all respondents, data protection budgets are going to rise about 6.5% over what it was last year. Now, Dave, that alone is pretty interesting. You follow the IDC and the Gartner numbers. They're not at 6.5%, right? What do they say about what the rest of IT spend looks like?
Yeah, from an overall IT spend perspective, we're really kind of in the mid single digits at best, kind of more in that upper 4, low 5% from a IT software spend, slightly better. But interestingly enough, backup and recovery, or let's just call it availability, data protection.
Sure.
It's looking stronger or higher than what we've seen. So that 6.5%, a full maybe 2 percentage points to 1.5-ish percentage points higher is very significant when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar spend rate here. The other thing I think is very interesting is I've argued for years, really going back to the early 2000s, that availability budgets woefully dragged behind the amount of deployment of new applications, virtualized environments, new server deployments, et cetera, that organizations were making. Not to suggest it should be one-to-one, but that we're changing infrastructure, we're changing and expanding applications far faster than we're revisiting disaster recovery, backup recovery. So this, I think, is good news. I know it goes well with your saying. I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you offer the great soundbite that you've got on it. But here's the positive. If what we saw before was a little glass half empty, here's a glass half full in my perspective that, okay, organizations are literally voting with their budget. Hey, we think we have to do something about this. We can't just ignore it. In the past, we thought we could maybe delay, defer, only do a little bit of modernization because maybe the rainy day won't happen. We've talked about why that rainy day, aka cyber, might actually be pushing us back into the spotlight. But I view this stat as a very positive one.
Absolutely. I also think that, when you were just moving a workload from one data center platform to another, you could make that legacy backup solution last just a little bit longer, just squeeze that last bit of blood out of the stone, right? But you can't do that when the workload leaves the data center, right? Whatever stuff you were using in the data center is no longer going to work the same way. Now, the stat says 6.5%, and as you mentioned, that's about 1.5 to 2 points higher than what overall spend is, which means they're going to disproportionately spend on data protection compared to other aspects of IT. But take a look at the graph itself. So what you see here is in the colors is the if organizations are increasing their budget, that's in green. If it was neutral, it stays in gray. Those folks that are planning on decreasing their budgets are in orange. And what we got in orange? 4 plus 3 is 7 plus 2 is 9. So 9% of folks are planning on decreasing. 7% are staying neutral. Of the 85% of organizations that's represented in the green, of the 85% that said that they are going to increase, the average increase among them is actually 8.3%, nearly double overall spend. So folks certainly are making that investment overall. Again, when you modernize production, you have to modernize protection. I'm willing to bet that for the last 2 years that has fallen behind. I love the fact in 2023, it looks like a lot of organizations are catching up. That being said, they're not done modernizing production yet. And that's going to be the topic for the rest of our talk. But first, Dave, how about we go to the map?
Yeah, and really almost an unusual amount of activity in a hugely positive way. So,
nice.
Looking over and, Canada, we love it when the big geographies come in. We've got a few people from Canada, including Toronto surrounding area. So shout out there. In the United States, we've also added others in Texas besides Jason himself, Florida as well. We've got Costa Rica in there. Somewhere in that green mix as well. And then if we look over across the globe, a lot of Europe, Portugal, Sweden, Ukraine, Austria, Romania, Czech Republic, Turkey, Germany, Italy, Poland, Slovakia, United Kingdom, Liechtenstein, which might be a new one for me in the couple of years, actually 2.5 years we've been doing this. Azerbaijan also has come in, so a lot turning green over there. Thank you for that. And if we look over
Liechtenstein either, and I would remember because they're on my bucket list because that country name is just too cool not to say. I mean, yeah.
No, shout out to them. And then we see Oman, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Kenya, and Botswana also coming in. So huge shout out to everyone. Thanks for chatting. And again, if you have any other comments or questions, feel free to enter those as well. But we always love to see who's watching this live. Quick shout out to, we do persist this on our YouTube channel. We'll get actually up to thousands of additional views later on during the week after we go live on Mondays with this, but definitely thanks for coming in. So Jason, I'll go off script only slightly here because we usually try not to make this very much or at all a Veeam commercial. But a couple weeks ago, we were literally scattered around the world doing Veeam global kickoffs. And actually did simultaneous 5 different locations. I was in Kuala Lumpur. Jason was in Atlanta in the United States. We had people in Prague. Let's see, also Romania. I know I'm forgetting one somewhere. Bucharest, Romania. Somehow I feel like I'm still missing one. But those taking place, we offered some of this data, this data protection trends to say, hey, everybody, here's what's going on in the industry. This isn't a vendor's view, meaning Veeam's view. This is what the market is saying. And I was trying to get the sales teams excited to say, look, here are the challenges they're facing, things that you just illustrated and talked through, Jason. But here's the opportunity. And honestly, now this August will be 34 years I've been paid to be in backup recovery. And I don't remember a time when you had this interesting confluence of organizations saying, I think I have a problem, and organizationally, we are going to go and invest in trying to solve that problem right now, not way into the future. I view it as hugely positive. So huge shout out to that. Oh, Yerevan, that thank you. Our tech team is coming to the rescue as they always do in Armenia. Yerevan, forgot I should note that one because that's where our boss, our chief technology officer, went. So not good on my part on that one. But yeah, Yerevan was our fifth location. But shout out to everyone who's saying, okay, we think we're not what we need to be from an availability perspective. We've managed to convince our organizations to do something else about that. Now's probably a good pivot point, Jason, to take us through the second part of the conversation.
Yeah, so the good news is they're investing in protection to keep up with their investments prior in production. The other part of that is it's not all about money shift from one side to the other. So the last question on the that we're sharing for today is when we talk about digital transformation or IT modernization, the question comes here's the question. And when it comes to your organization's ability to achieve your digital transformation initiatives, what are the challenges? And long lines are all the challenges that apply. Short lines is what's the most challenging thing expected for 2023. And Dave, for as long as we've been running this survey, it was always skills, right? You can't go where you've never been before. You don't know how, right? So skills has almost always been stuck. Economic uncertainty has been a big thing ever since 2020 because the pandemic kind of flipped everybody on their side. But we've got a new winner on the list this year: most common impedance as well as the most challenging impedance. I hate to say I'm not surprised.
Yeah, you really cannot have a conversation about the data center in this day and age, really arguably the last probably going on 2 years, without talking about ransomware, cyber resiliency, cyber threats, etc. So to Jason's point, just coming back to what's number two on this list, skills, really for decades, CIOs self-report that skills has been either the number one or number two impediment. Now going back since the early 2000s, that certainly continues, that remains. Skills challenges, human capital shortages remain certainly high on the list. There's a double whammy here in my mind, Jason, of why I'm a little concerned about cyber being so high on the list. One, it means obviously that it's becoming more and more of a challenge for more and more organizations. So that in and of itself is somewhat disappointing. We're not materially improving our cybersecurity posture as an industry. We're actually still facing those challenges, but it also represents an enormous opportunity cost, meaning if more and more of the organization is having to force new kind of outlook, new spend, new administrative activity around cyber resiliency, that means that they're not doing other things that are on this list. And especially at a time, meaning since the pandemic, when a whole lot of business activity has shifted, a lot of the way that organizations do commerce, interact with their customers, interact with their partners, has shifted radically, which means that digital transformation had to be the conduit to help fuel that. So cyber being so high is concerning because it does mean there's external bad actors that are unfortunately having more success than we would have liked. It also means some of the things that are on the digital transformation list just aren't getting tended to. The economic uncertainty certainly can understand that. You go down the list, these are things that we're actually, frankly, used to seeing some shape and form or another for many years. But, Jason, I think as we think about this, the good news, if there is a good news, if people are going to go spend to improve recovery, to improve availability, to address the shifting landscape, then at least they're going to get more return on their investment, in my opinion, because they will also put themselves in a better cyber resiliency posture as well.
Yeah, at least the good news is at least the budget investments that we're talking about from the last couple slides, they're going to manifest in some of the ways that that you're going to be mitigating in cyber threats, which is the top thing, which is in the way. So arguably, if you invest in protection to cover the production that you've done and to prepare or mitigate against cyber, then you've alleviated that challenge so that you can then go do the digital transformation that you really like to do. I will say, Dave, just to comment more on this slide, though, this kind of breaks my heart. Right. I mean, I know you're having some home repair stuff done, and I had some done a few months ago. And I think about it this way. What you'd really like to do is renovate the kitchen, right? I mean, that's what you'd like to do. But you can't do that normally because when you're about to renovate the kitchen, you find out that you've got some leaks in some plumbing in one of the bathrooms in the back of the house. And that's what IT has been doing for a long time is they want to do something new that's going to add new value, like a new kitchen. But they can't because they got some basic plumbing problems. They got some infrastructure, some hardware, some software to fix. And that's normal in our digital transformation conversation. But what this slide says right now is, you know what? Not only can we not do the bathroom, not only can we not fix the plumbing in the kitchen or the bathroom, we're going to have to go and spend all of our money for this year on a big new fence outside the house. Nothing gets done in the house because we're going to go and build a new fence, right? When you look at cyber and preventing for threats from the outside, you'd really rather be working on stuff inside the house that's going to add value, but you can't. And that kind of makes me sad. So with that, hey, we've got a couple questions, by the way. We did throw it in the chat as well, but there was a question around V12. I promise no one is more excited about V12. Clemens was asking, when's BNR 12 coming out? So if you didn't see some of the LinkedIn stuff, we did RTM to some of our strategic partners. They need to get a head start. Usually it's about T-2 weeks, and we have announced that February 14th is our launch event. I think we're going to have some links for that shared as well. So we are at T-13 days ish. My math is wrong. To actually having GA of the product. So super excited for that. Also super excited that people keep chiming in on the map, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shout out Clemens. He also mentions the change in database as well. We'll be offering a ton of, actually, it's like 550 new features in version 12. RTM'd yesterday, as well as updates to many of the agents. Quick shout out, a lot of the cloud infrastructure as a service protection coming soon too. Our recovery orchestration update coming, our service VM provider console update, our VM1 monitoring and analytics getting updated, as well as in the very near future, version 2 of our Salesforce offering, and of course, Cast and our friends never stand still there as well. Quick shout out Mohammed, who I liked his comment from Cairo. He said cyber protection should start from the planning phase. Totally agree with you. You should, ideally, you're baking cyber resilience as well as all availability into your plan from the very, very beginning. That's absolutely, in our opinion, the right answer. Unfortunately, if things do go wrong, there is an escape. And I think we're in the day and age where we have to plan for an escape. In other words, plan for failure. That's always good engineering mindset. Then what do you do to focus on recovery after the fact if something does go bad? But let's hit the map because we've had some more organizations come in as well from different areas, including new to the list is Massachusetts on the YouTube feed. We are multicasting on many different feeds, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter as well. So shout out there. Brazil has come in. That always gets a nice big green swath covered there. And we've got Pakistan, Qatar, Egypt, Mozambique, Iran, and South Africa.
One of my faves.
Yeah, Jason always loves that. So shout out over there. So overall, world looking very nice. Thanks everyone for joining us live. We always appreciate the comments too. Questions. Keep those rolling in, not just today, but in future episodes also. So as we begin to pivot a little bit, Jason, we always do like to just point out some of the other industry independent, promise it's not a Veeam commercial in any stretch, that we've been doing, Jason, myself, and our great colleague Julie Webb as well. We've been engaging globally with an independent analyst firm and research firm to be able to go pull this data. Jason's provided the handy QR codes, but you can also see the links if you prefer to click on those. We have short versions of those, including ransomware trends, where it's 1,000 organizations that did get hit with ransomware
Yep.
and the lessons that they've learned. I know Jason's done some great presentations, learning lessons from 1,000 organizations. So you always say you owe it to yourself to get informed. Speaking of informed, we hit cloud earlier in this discussion. We have 1,700 organizations commenting on a variety of different use cases and from different personas around cloud usage. Then we mentioned Salesforce in passing. Veeam released a Salesforce product around the turn of the year. To better understand that persona, we actually went out and interviewed 800 organizations about their needs for managing Salesforce.com across the globe. And then, of course, our flagship research that we've been discussing, data protection trends as well.
And I would just point out there's one last little nugget on this slide that I hope folks look at, and that's that email address on the top. If you have questions about any of the research that Veeam produces along the way, again, we hire independent analyst firms and research houses. They go and do the questions. No one knows that it's Veeam. It's all anonymous and confidential. We get the data back, and then we write the reports. But if you have questions about this, you can reach our colleague Julie Webb, as well as Dave and me. We're the three respondents to strategic research at Veeam.com. So ask us questions. We'd love to throw them. And in fact, if they're really good questions, you might even find your answers on next week's podcast.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for joining. Really always appreciate the comments and the interaction. We're going, I said 2.5 years earlier, Jason, we're actually going on 3 years. World Backup Day, end of March, will be 3 years since we've started our streams, and they're still going strong. So shout out to everyone for that. Until we meet again, I do want to give a shout out. Speaking of shout outs, our colleague Rick Vanover has this Thursday Tech Bites. He's going to be chatting with Howard Marks from Vast Data, talking about the case for all flash backup targets, all flash, object storage, Veeam version 12 that we alluded to. And I'll tell you, Jason, in my home lab, I've gone almost entirely flash, NVMe, and then external flash drives as well. It made a huge difference in speed, even from a lab environment, a small lab environment, but also from a home perspective. So with the prices being what they are, I think there's never been a better time to consider going all flash, but we'll let Howard and Rick break that down this coming Thursday, same time as this episode went live. But until then, we see you next week. Stay safe, stay positive, and stay warm, depending on where you are in the world.